G'day guys, I'm Stu Shannon and today we're talking knots. And I want to show you what I think are the 6 most important knots for bushcraft. Most of these knots I'm going to show you are really relating to setting up your camp and setting up your shelter, because to me, you know, what's more important than getting a good shelter set up that you can trust. But before we do that, I want to get into some knot tying basics just to make sure you've got a grip on that. And then I'm going to go through and show you the 6 knots that I think are most critical for bushcraft, and I might even throw one bonus one in at the end. Before we get into our first knot, I want to show you a couple of things that I've got with me here that I bring on, you know, every time I go out into the bush, whether I'm going out for a day or I'm on a multi-day hike. There's 3 different types of cordage that I always bring. The first and most critical that I bring is 550 USA made paracord. Now this is 7-core paracord. It's nylon. It's the best. You'll want to have some of that on you. You know, the others are just sort of luxury, but this one here, that 550 paracord, that's my critical cordage. I keep some number 12 Mariner's bank line. This is handy for all sorts of little stuff, from making snares to fishing lines to just sewing, you know, any intricate stuff that you need to do. That size 12 Mariner's bank line is great. And then for stuff where you need the bank line to do a bit more work for you, size 36 Mariner's bank line I always have with me as well. I normally wouldn't bring this much, but for the purposes of the video, we've got it all here. The reason I've got these pieces of wood here is I'm going to make some stakes out of these, because one of the knots that I'm going to show you requires something to tie off to. So I'm going to use these stakes as an example for you. Okay, so before we get into the knots, I want to show you some basic knot terminology. So before we tie any knot, it's important to know this stuff, because that's going to help me to explain it to you. So this is your cordage. The end that we're working with, or the end that has the tip on it here, this is our working end. And the other end, this one over here, this is what we call the standing end. Anytime when we cross the knot over itself, that's called a loop, where the knot is doubled over itself and forming a circular shape here. That's a loop. Anytime where the knot is forming this U shape, we call that a bite. So we've got a loop and a bite. Standing end, working end. The other thing that I want to make sure of is that everyone is familiar with a simple overhand knot. If you don't know this one, you're going to struggle to do any of the others, but just a basic overhand knot. This is not one of the 6, mind you. First we start by forming a loop, and we pass the working end back through that loop, and then we pull it tight. That's an overhand knot. I just want to make sure everyone knows that before we get started. Okay, the first knot that we're going to learn is the Siberian Hitch, and this is a knot that you can use to tie a piece of cordage off to a pole or a tree, and it's what we use to start our ridge line for our shelter. It's a pretty simple knot, so just watch carefully. But what you're going to do, I like to start by taking the working end and passing it around the pole or the tree clockwise. Okay, so we have our working end here, we have our standing end here. What you're going to do is you're going to give yourself plenty on the side of the working end. Alright, so we've got plenty of cordage here. Then what you're going to do is you're going to lay your left hand out flat like so. You're going to take your working end and you're going to wrap it around your hand once, so that you now have this appearance of 3 lines over your hand. Next step is pretty simple. You're going to drop your hand down, you're going to bring it up, and you're going to bring it over the top. You're still holding this working end with your right hand. What you're going to do is you're going to grab that working end about halfway up between these 2 fingers, and you're going to pull it through the loop that you created with your hand. We're going to continue to pull tight and just dress that knot up nice and tight. Make that bite a little bit smaller. So passing that bite through the loop, and then all we do is we can pull the standing end and tension that knot up against the tree, and that's ready for our ridge line. Alright, the second knot we're going to learn is called the taut line hitch, and this is a knot that we're going to tie when we already have our standing end tied to something at the other end, and we've got our working end free, but we want to secure this to a pole or a tree, and we want the line to be nice and taut. the taut line hitch. So the way we do it, once again, I like to work clockwise, is we pass the cordage around the tree clockwise, like this, and then we take the working end and we pass it underneath our standing end. And as we do that, we want to pull plenty of tension on the taut end. You can see how tight that's made that end. Then I'm going to come around the tree anti-clockwise, crossing over my line as I do to help hold that tension. And what I'm going to do as I come around the other side is I'm going to lay my line over the top of my taut standing end, and that forms a little triangle in this part here. I'm going to take a bite. You see me forming a bite there? I'm going to take that bite and I'm going to pass it up through the bottom of that triangle. Okay? Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another bite and I'm going to pass it through the bite that I just formed. And then I'm going to pull the whole thing tight and I'm going to dress that knot. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shrink down the size of this last bite. And there you have it. That line is super taut. And all you need to do to release it is yank down on this free end. That's the taut line hitch. All right, guys, the next knot that I'm going to teach you is called the adjustable knot, and it's usually used on a tent peg in place of those little plastic things that you have on your guy line in order to tension up a guy line. So if you have any kind of cordage that you're putting in place that you need to tension up while it's in place, this adjustable knot is going to be good for that. But I thought because I'm going to be needing some pegs anyway, I thought I'd use this opportunity to show you how to make a peg in bushcraft. Using those steel pegs from the camp store is almost like blasphemy in bushcraft. You really want to be making your own pegs when you're out there. And the good news is, once you've made them, you can if you want to keep them with you. It's extra weight that I don't need, and it takes like a couple of minutes to make a tent peg. So it's something that I just tend to make when I'm out and about. But I'm going to show you how to make a quick tent peg. So you just want to take your knife and you want to get one end sharpened up. So take some nice big chunks off. Shouldn't take too long to get that done. It doesn't need to be razor sharp, it just needs to be sharp enough that you can hammer it into the ground. So get a nice point on that stick. The thing about Australia is most of our woods that we have to work with, they're all very, very hard wood. So it makes tasks like this a little bit longer than it would in the US or Canada, because you guys have a lot more softwoods available. When you're trying to select sticks for your pegs, try and make sure you're selecting nice, straight sticks, or it's going to make banging them in a bit of a nightmare. And that should be sharp enough to get us into the ground. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a nice tip on it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to form a 7 notch in this. And a 7 notch is a really commonly used notch in bushcraft. So what we're going to do is we're just going to roll our knife back and forth to start the notch, just about an inch off the top of our peg. Okay, and then we're going to start cutting this 7 shape into the notch, just adding to that flat part of the notch as we go. And essentially what we're doing is we're creating an angle into the peg that from a side view will form somewhat of a 7 shape. It doesn't have to be a massive notch, just enough to keep your line in place. So there's your 7 notch, and then what you want to do before you bang it in, you just want to round off this edge a little bit, because if you don't, you start banging it in, you're going to split your peg. So just take just that very edge off the top of your tent peg. And that's ready to bang in without splitting. So we've got our 7 notch in there, we've got our top rounded off, and we've got our point on the end. That's how we make a tent peg in bushcraft. Okay, this one's actually pretty tricky to shoot because my cordage is a very similar color to the foliage around here, but you can see I've got my stake hammered in down there at a 45-degree angle. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how we do this knot from this side. So we start off by throwing our working end over our standing end, or our taut end. So we throw that over once, and that forms this rectangle shape in the line. So that's your first cue. Then what you want to do is you want to wrap that working end once and twice over that standing end. Okay, so we wrapped once, twice around that standing end. Then what we want to do is we want to come under again, but this time we're coming right under both ropes. We're coming back under here as well, and what we're going to do is we're going to form a bite. Okay, and we're going to push that bite through this. We're going to push the bite through this rectangle that we've created here, and then we're going to pull everything tight. Okay, and once we do that and dress that knot, let's make that bite a little bit smaller. That knot can then slide up or down, and it's going to hold nice and tight. We can loosen that up by just sliding it down nice and loose. We can tighten it up by sliding it back up. Standing, I'll put that back on my 7 notch. We can tighten that up, and that's great for guy lines or any time when you need to tension some cordage, the adjustable knot. Okay guys, the next knot that I'm going to show you is an overhand knot on a bite. Now everyone already knows how to do an overhand knot, but what I want you to do to start this overhand knot on a bite is just grab your working end and place it parallel beside your standing end so that you form a long bite. Okay, once you've done that, you're going to pinch them together, and you're going to now treat this as if it's one piece of cordage. You're just going to tie a simple overhand knot in that doubled up cordage. So a simple overhand knot in the doubled up cordage, and that is an overhand knot on a bite, and you see it forms this loop. That is really, really handy for things like tying to the top of tent poles. It also comes in handy for making a lasso. So if you want something that, you know, tensions around a log or around the corner of a tarp, you can do a couple of different things, but you can essentially just pass the other end through that loop, and you now have a lasso that can tighten around a pole or a branch or whatever you might need. So that knot there, one of my very handy ones, and it also forms the start of my next knot. Now to show you my next knot, which is the Prussic knot, I'm using just a piece that I've cut off my number 36 Mariner's bank line, and this knot starts with our overhand knot on a bite. So the first thing you're going to do is tie your overhand knot on a bite in this piece of Mariner's bank line. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now I want the knot to end right near the bottom of this, so I'm going to make sure that I pull it down so that the knot ends right near these tails here. Dress that knot up so it's nice and pretty. So there we go, and I've got a nice big loop there with a knot at the bottom. But the Prussic knot is actually used to form a tensioning point on a fixed line. So I've got my ridge line here. I don't know if you can see that behind, but I'm going to tie a Prussic knot onto the ridge line, and we then use that to tension up our tarp. So the Prussic knot is pretty simple. What you do is you pass your loop that you've made right behind your fixed line, like so, and you take this end with the knot and pass it around your fixed line and through the loop once, around your fixed line and through the loop twice, and then you just tighten it all up, and you're going to get a knot that can slide up and down on your ridge line this way, but when any tension is pulled on it at an angle, it does not move. And that's what we use to tension up the corners of our tarp, right? And the way that I do it, there's a lot of different ways of doing this, but I'm just going to grab a stick quickly so I can make a toggle. So what I do is I pass the end of our Prussic through my hootchy loop there, and then I pass a stick through the end of my Prussic as a toggle, and I just sit that there, and that way I can grab my Prussic up here, I can slide it up, and I can tension my hootchy right up. So that is the Prussic knot. It can be used for many different applications. If you flip that whole thing from horizontal to vertical, that knot can be used for climbing. So when you pull down on this end of it, it's not going to slip down the line, but as you climb, of course, you can slide this part of the knot up and down. Prussic knot is a very handy knot in bushcraft. All right, the next knot that I'm going to teach you is a knot that we use to tie two pieces of rope together. So sometimes you might be in a situation where you've got enough rope, but you know, individually the ropes aren't long enough. You need to tie them together. So we're going to use what's called a sheet bend. Now this is probably one of the trickier knots to explain. It's probably easier just to watch and actually do. But the way that you do the sheet bend is you start by forming a bight in one side, and you're going to take the working end of the other rope and you're going to pass it behind that bight. You're going to pass it up through the other side, and then you're going to pass it around and behind that bight that you formed. Okay, so it comes through the back, over the top, around and behind, and then what you're going to do is you're going to grab that end and you're going to pass it under the piece that is that first came through that sheet bend, and you're going to pull that out like so. And as you tension it up, these two knots are just going to tighten on each other, and now you have two ropes tied together that aren't going to come apart. They're only going to get tighter as you pull on them. The sheet bend, used for connecting two pieces of cordage together. Okay, now I am losing light, but I did promise you guys one bonus knot at the end of the video. Now this is something that I use rarely, and it's something that you would probably use in more of a survival situation, but it's something that you can use for trapping, and it's called a poacher's knot. And basically what you do is you start off by forming a bight, okay, like so. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take that bight and you're going to double, make a nice long bight. So you're going to pass this end back towards the bight, and then you're going to pass this end around the base of the bight, once, back over itself, twice, back over itself, 3 times, and then you're going to take the end and you're going to pass it through those little loops that you've just created, and you're going to form what's known as a poacher's knot. Okay, and that's a pretty handy knot to know in snaring and in trapping, but that would only be used in survival situations. Snaring and improvised traps is actually illegal in Australia. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video on 6 knots to know for bushcraft. I'm going to get out of here now and finish setting up camp because I'm losing the sun, and I don't want to be left setting up in the dark. But I appreciate you guys watching this video. Please give it a like and give the channel a subscribe. That would be hugely helpful. Thank you guys.